Welcome to Media and Monuments, presented by Women in Film and Video in Washington, D.C. Media and Monuments features conversations with industry professionals speaking on a range of topics of interest to screen-based media makers.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on Media and Monuments podcast. This episode is a pretty fun one for me, Tara. We'll get to why. Basically, ever wonder what the holiday classic It's a Wonderful Life would look like with a masked serial killer on the loose in Bedford Falls with only one plucky young final girl in the James Stewart role as the only one who can put an end to all of the bloodshed? That's the premise of the new horror comedy with equal parts heart and bloody mayhem. It's a Wonderful Knife. Today we are joined by the film's director, Tyler MacIntyre. Did I say it right? Tyler MacIntyre.
Yeah, that's correct.
So thank you so much for coming on. One of the reasons why it's pretty special, last season, there's 3 co-hosts, and Sandra is one of the co-hosts, and she does not like horror films, and I don't like holiday films. We had learned. We did a special on horror films and holiday films, and we both complained on each other's episode. I'm like, I can't stand holiday movies. If I see one more stupid hot chocolate with the and she's like, I don't like being scared. So when we found out about this movie, they're like, Tara, you're doing it. I'm like, glad to. So I wanted to say, like, this has been a really fun twist on things. How did you guys decide on that? And were there any problems with like copyright issues or anything like that?
No, not really. I mean, it's just inspired by, the sort of high concept of It's a Wonderful Life, and obviously like the title is a bit of a pun, but it's not like a beat for beat remake at all. And I think that's fairly apparent if you kind of watch the movie. Is like the structure is completely different, the characters are completely different. Like all it is doing is just kind of riffing on that. And to be fair, like It's a Wonderful Life, is a riff on A Christmas Carol. So it and we tried to essentially be as beholden as It's a Wonderful Life is to The Christmas Carol as we are to that film. And but really we just wanted to make kind of a roller coaster slasher with a lot of holiday flavor.
Well, some of the death scenes were kind of fun. The producer, Brandon, and I watched it. Thank you so much for an early release. And he was like, I could never look at a candy cane decoration the same way again. How did you guys approach practical effects with large amounts of either blood and gore, especially when it's snowy too, so white?
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely, worked with a lot of practical effects before and some digital effects. I've made a couple of horror films so far, and it's always a very fun part of the process, kind of figuring out exactly how you're going to pull off those gags. Mostly, it's about trying to get the right confluence of logistics and price point and the locations and things like that, and making sure that you have these kind of creative kills, because a lot of the horror fans kind of look for that sort of thing. And sometimes you're not able to, you have to rethink things kind of, later in the process or kind of last minute sometimes. Some of them, like the candy cane death you mentioned, was a very early one that we knew we could sort of place anywhere, and that was such a flexible kind of fun idea and very holiday focused, and you haven't really seen it before, so it was kind of like a good thing. Whereas some of them are more like nods to other types of kills that we've seen, and then we want to do our version of them with a holiday spin and things like that. So and that's a fun part of the process. And some of that's on the page with Michael, and some of that's something we figure out between myself and the DP and the production designer, like as we're getting closer to production.
And one thing that's like pretty, I feel like there's a lot of pressure in doing a horror film with how the killer looks like, right? So there's the iconic jumpsuit for Michael Myers, or the green and red sweater for Freddy Krueger, so forth, so forth. How did you guys approach the killer's look for your film? Because it is quite unique.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I mean, it's been something that we were toying around with in the script. He's referred to as kind of all white and an angel costume, and so we knew that that involved a cloak, but we weren't exactly sure. And they also described kind of the ornate kind of knife or dagger that he has. And so we knew we had kind of like a jumping off point about it. And just based on the action and like who ended up kind of having to sort of justify being in the suit, we knew he was going to be kind of more of a lean and fast kind of killer, a little bit more like a ghost face versus like a bigger killer, like a Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers kind of thing, like the big lumbering Hulk kind. And so we knew we wanted a bit of a unique silhouette, but it became pretty apparent that we didn't want wings. They were kind of impractical. They were a bit like a cape or something. It made him look too like Spirit Halloween costume fairy kind of thing, where it was just weird. Running through. It would have been weird. And so we knew that we wanted to have sort of sharper shoulder blades to kind of give that impression. But then we looked at a lot of like tree toppers, like angel tree toppers. And a lot of those ones, especially the vintage ones, have kind of these sort of blank kind of porcelain expressions. And so that was kind of a jumping off point for us. And we wanted essentially his face to have this like blank white, kind of be featureless with no eyes, and have almost the texture of like a frosted light bulb. So you could see like the crisp lights reflected in it, and it would be kind of creepy. But it also had these, set of challenges, like we'd have to hide him in snow and against white surfaces, instead of like in shadow, which a lot of, darker, our killers are kind of darker costumes. And which was fun to kind of figure out.
Yeah, you guys did a really good job. When I was watching it in the previews, I was like, oh, that's a nice, pretty look for a killer. And then when I watched him, like, yeah, I was thinking in my head, I'm like, if I had to be killed by someone, this was like a nice thing to look out right before. And then I'm watching, I'm like, no, never mind. It's too hard.
Yeah. I mean, he ended up kind of having a bit of a graceful kind of quality to him that I think Cody, who's our stunt person who wore the costume most of the time, he also had to sort of learn to operate somewhat because the mask was extremely hard to see out of. And so we had these different stages of it that were more or less easy to see out of. But generally speaking, it's really hard to make like a shiny white surface that you can see through, that's like a one-way glass. And it doesn't really work very well. And so depending on the lighting conditions, like he couldn't see much at all. Also, he often learned things kind of blind and then would sort of rehearse them. And it gave it this very kind of sort of graceful quality in certain moments that is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it was really cool, a nice touch. Because I think what you guys did a pretty good job is for such a beloved film, It's a Wonderful Life, not to make it too gory or too something more respectful. Like even the way it's dressed or the set design and it's like Aurora Borealis and all that stuff was kind of nice. And I'm be like, see, it's not insulting or anything like that. Because was that a lot of pressure? You're like, oh, we're going to piss off a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a beloved kind of classic, and we're definitely kind of doing a bit of a riff on it. It's sort of fundamental enough to the lexicon where people are not in that weird kind of interstitial space where they're so they don't want to see anything like the thing they love. Like I think it's been sort of ingrained in culture long enough. I mean, the movie's almost 80 years old, so it's pretty far back in the public consciousness, but it is something that people are very aware of. And we aren't the first people to kind of riff on that sort of, magical like wish where you see your life differently. Like, people are very aware of that trope. And so we just wanted to make sure that we were having the right type of fun with it in like a horror wrapper. But for me, like the challenge was more trying to bring that warm, fuzzy feeling and that kind of uplifting sort of ending to something that is, I mean, no spoilers, but to a slasher movie, which often don't have that. So, it's a relatively well-meaning movie, in when you compare it to other things in its subgenre. And I think that's why people kind of have been sort of responding well to it, is because it has this sort of warmth to it.
Yeah, that's definitely true. One of my questions is that there were quite a few, about 5 or so main characters that are queer. Can you talk about why you guys decided to use, have so many LGBTQ plus characters in this film?
It's not, really out of the norm for Michael or myself. I mean, Michael's a queer man, and his previous film, the Freaky, definitely had some characters who were kind of at the forefront. A previous movie I made, Tragedy Girls, had a lot of kind of queer elements, and definitely was something that was relatively intentionally queer coded. And so we thought like, now that we kind of had those two movies like do, well within their genres, this time around, people were just a lot more like supportive of it. I mean, even going back a couple of years, like it was a lot harder to get a central character to have any sort of queer elements for fear of a lot of, just general homophobia in the public, and also like internationally, it's tough to sell films, but like times are changing, and obviously for the better, and so like there was definitely those sorts of elements. We really wanted to do well-liked kind of queer athlete, and like not really hang a lantern on it, just kind of like not be about, him realizing his queer, just like it was just something about, he was just a person living his life. And that was kind of, a discussion for us early on. And so he was in the script pretty early, and Gail, like had a sort of like cool ant quality. And then that was something that happened in development even before I was on. It was a discussion between Adam Hendricks, our producer, and Michael, that they were like, well, let's just make the, and gay as well. And so it sort of, like those two were kind of in the script when I got on. But then through production, like we, like Bernie and Winnie's relationship in the movie, and this is a bit of a spoilery thing, like, had kind of these sort of shades of being, of kind of implied queerness to it, but it was more just like an intimate sort of friendship. And then through casting Jane Widdop and Jess McLeod, they had like a chemistry to it, and the idea really came from like us all kind of, like they definitely like approached us being like, hey, can we play this a bit more like a romance? And then it really just grew from there, and it was more responding to like the type of chemistry we were seeing. And then before you know it, like we had a lot of we had a lot more queer characters than is the norm. But again, that's something that our studio was supportive of, and it's great that we're in that time, and so we wanted to kind of seize the opportunity as it presented itself.
It's a great point, because while watching it, all these characters, no one's playing like, you tend to see like one queer character who's sort of like in the backdrop or a side character, something. It was very interesting. It didn't play with the tropes, and it's like, listen, these are all these characters, and they help with either the murder, the killer, or the hero. And some happen to be gay, some happen not to be gay. That's the end of it. So it didn't play with those kind of, I just expected them to be straight because in the history it has been that way. Or, oh, it's interesting that they made it gay. You guys just made it very like, that's how it is. And it's nice that you shared the process of like, okay, we decided on a couple of characters. It sounds like from the beginning, like the brother being gay, but he's not, he's the high school, not jock, but like he's the popular guy.
I mean,
and that's usually not what you see in films, that the gay guy is the popular guy. And then you saw chemistry between these, the actors and stuff, and started kind of changing it. And it just felt like a natural process.
I don't think we were like too preoccupied by trying to make the movie more queer than it kind of felt like it was, but I mean, it just really, honestly, like we just had a lot of queer and like non-binary people like working on the movie and the crew and stuff like that. And I don't know, it all kind of fell into place in a way that was natural for the type of story we were telling.
I was just thinking like it felt natural. So I was just curious on how much was it really a conscious effort? And it sounds like it's a little bit of both, but it showed the naturalness of it, that's just how the characters are.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I always try to kind of listen to sort of what's happening, like as you're kind of making it, because like it doesn't make sense to sort of fight the like the natural like things that are happening on set. Like you don't want to rebel against the chemistry. It's hard to fit the square pegs into the round holes. Like in any sort of performance, and so you really want to seize those opportunities because that's where the good stuff is.
Well, one of the other things that I noticed, there's sort of a trend now of these fun teen-centric horror movies in the last few years. We have Talk to Me, Happy Death Day, Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. Now this one, and it's reminiscent of some of the 90s teen slasher movie craze. Do you look to continue working in this genre? And how do you approach creating these kinds of films for a Gen Z and younger millennial audience?
This is my third film, and they've all been sort of younger skewing, horror films. And I always try and approach it, depending on the type of characters that are. I wasn't one of the writers on this, so it's a bit of a different thing because I am able to sort of hire performers to collaborate with and sort of figure out how to make it authentic. Whereas when I'm writing things, I always try and figure out like, well, as a guy in his 30s, like it's a little bit harder to put myself in the mindset of like often like protagonists who are going through a different experience, and so I just want to make sure that I sort of have ways of sort of checking in with the authenticity of it. And often I do like table reads with kind of younger performers and get sort of feedback, or talk to younger writers who are a bit closer to that sort of experience, and make sure that we're not sort of overstepping. But a lot of things that I do are quite stylized, and they're often grounded in some pretty heavy satire. It's more flexible. Like it's not like anyone's like, oh man, It's a Wonderful, Knife was not the most authentic movie, but I do want them to see some truth in it, and you just have to be honest about that.
Last question, because it actually ties in what we just talked about. Congratulations on your recent box office success with your other film, Five Nights at Freddy's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Five Nights at Freddy's. Yeah.
Yes. And so it's my understanding you share a screen story credit.
So myself and my writing partner, Chris Lee Hill, we wrote a number of drafts of Five Nights at Freddy's over the years, and were brought in and out a couple times to sort of work with Scott Coffin, who was the creator of the game, to a team at Blumhouse to try and figure out how to sort of figure out that narrative. Because, there's over a dozen games, and there's, hundreds of characters, and like a lot of different, ways to sort of skin that cat as it's a video game adaptation. And so we were able to bring a bit of a frame and to it, and kind of figure out the type of story that was maybe need to be told. And like the pandemic, the timeline got a little strange, and so we weren't able to I was attached to direct it at a certain point, and then eventually it ended up Emma Tommy and her team ended up being able to get across the finish line. I think did a great job. People are really responding to it, and it's been awesome to see it sort of find its audience.
It's a Wonderful Knife arrives in theaters starting November 10th, just in time to kick off the holiday season. Thank you guys so much, and happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you.
Thank you for listening to Media and Monuments, a service of Women in Film and Video. Please remember to review, rate, and subscribe wherever you listen to this podcast. For more information about WIF, please visit our website at www.wif.org. Media and Monuments is produced by Sandra Abrams, Candace Block, Brandon Ferry, and Tara Jabbari, and edited by Emma Klein, with audio production and mix by Steve Lack Audio. For more information about our podcast, visit mediaandmonuments.com.